welcome everybody and welcome the panelists. Today we have Gulser Corat, who was formerly Director of Gender Equality at UNESCO, and she's an expert in artificial intelligence and gender equality, and she can tell us what she's moving on to next, because I know she's got interesting plans. We have Elena Sinel, who is founder of Teens in AI, who I've done some work with in the past, who are fantastic, so she'll tell us some inspirational stories, I'm sure. And Victoria Bolin, who did some work for another organisation, similar name to my own, which is Women in AI, and we often get mixed up. And they recently written a report which is yet to be released on the impact of women and gender on AI. And the title of the panel is Tackling Opportunities and Risks on AI Through the Leadership of Women. And I think we're probably all a little bit aware of some of the risks, but I did want to sort of stress at the start that in my opinion, a lot of people mistake data bias as being AI bias, and in the widest frame of things, the bias and issues and risks to women are greater than just maybe data gaps and data bias. And an interesting, very quick story, so we can hand over to the panelists, is the issue, for example, of using virtual reality headsets for surgeons. Women and men predominantly detect motion in slightly different ways, and when you have certain error rates, that can impact on a surgeon's career and impact on the evaluation of women and their moving on, make them work harder. So sometimes when we look at the risks to women, it's not just about the data, so maybe we'll come back to that later, but I'm very keen to know about the opportunities as well, and the positive things. So Gulser, shall I start with you, because it just happens to be, and apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly. I pronounce my own children's names incorrectly. You just recently produced a report by UNESCO, which are Artificial Intelligence and Gender Equality, but you're also the lead author on the landmark study, which I know very well. I'd blush if I could. Closing the Gender Diversity and Digital Skills in Education, which I just think is a really pivotal report. So if you'd just like to talk a little bit about your work and your findings.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you to all the organizers of this meeting. I think it's very timely, very important, and I really like the fact that it's bringing together people from different walks of life, from different groups, including this very nice intergenerational aspect to it. I just completed my 16-year tenure at UNESCO. 31st of August was my last day, and it was the day we published the second report on this very specific issue. So I really welcome the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the overall research. For those of the participants who do not know much about UNESCO, let me just say a few words about the organization. It's one of the UN specialized agencies founded in 1945 with its headquarters in Paris, France, with 193 member states and 54 offices around the world. We work when I was with the organization, we worked in education, science, culture, communication and information, oceans, and gender equality is a global priority for UNESCO, and I was in charge of that program for the last 16 years. So this, what I want to talk to you about today is the findings of the two reports that you kindly mentioned. Allow me to show them to you. This is the I'd blush if I could. The first one that was published in March 2019, and the second one that got printed last Monday on the 31st of August. It's called Artificial Intelligence and Gender Equality, Key Findings of UNESCO's Global Dialogue. And Allison, you were a contributor to the second report, so let me thank you again for your participation, commitment, and your generosity to share your experience and ideas with us. Now, the focus of this session is artificial intelligence for the use of women for the benefit of women and girls through women's leadership. I have to say that the focus of our research, which lasted for 3 years, it was on the one hand to acknowledge the potential of artificial intelligence in terms of positive impact on the lives of girls and women, and in the longer term contributions to gender equality. But we looked more at the possible negative and harmful consequences. And it just so happened that we stumbled upon some observations which led us in that direction. Our goal was to identify current trends and issues with a view to engage in a dialogue with different stakeholders, from governments to academia to civil society to the private sector, which is really leading the effort in terms of the development of AI, so that we could address some of these issues early on before it was too late. But before I tell you more about what we found in those reports and what we recommend, let me just respond to the question that is the theme of this session: can technology be a tool for gender equality? And the answer is absolutely yes. Well-designed technology has immense potential to foster gender equality and inclusion. I'm sure that many of us who is connected to this session have felt better in strange cities, knowing that we can easily order a taxi with a smartphone, or we all felt more connected to our peers, to our families, to the external world during the COVID-19 confinement period, which many of us experienced in different parts of the world in different degrees. Specifically for gender equality, we have tracked some interesting innovations and highlighted them in our work. There are some very creative trailblazers who are designing applications that are conceived to improve the lives of girls and women. If I give you one example which really affected me a lot, it's an app developed by 5 teenage girls from Kenya who call themselves the Restorers. They have created an application that provides the 200 million victims of female genital mutilation with support services. In this app, there is also a panic button that alerts authorities to dangerous situations. This is just one example of a practical AI tool that is changing the lives of women in many parts of Africa and other parts of the world in a positive way. We have seen the importance and the usefulness of technology in also exposing biases. For example, we now have an app that tracks the participation of women and men at conferences, measuring the speaking time they are given to reveal some of the gender biases in global and regional meetings. And it's quite an eye-opener when you look at how these meetings are conducted, even when you have situations where there are rules about equal participation of women and men on panels, equal representation of experts in seminars. When you look at some of the deeper issues, you do see that there is bias. But the first report was an eye-opener even for me. As we discuss AI, we know that it's a very topical issue. We hear and read about it. We are fascinated with it, but we are also scared about its potential to change our lives and our work. And although I can say that I'm an avid reader and I have been following different developments in this area from a general interest perspective, until I started working on the report, on the research, in an informed manner, I really did not realize the significance of AI in terms of hindering or promoting or supporting our efforts to promote gender equality. In our first report, which really was a trailblazer and sparked a very important global conversation, it's the first time that any report I was involved in at UNESCO in 16 years created such media attention. I was interviewed by over 1,000 media outlets. I was on radio programs, on television programs, invited to conferences with 70,000 participants from the web world. So this was something quite unprecedented in my experience, but also in UNESCO experience. And one of the reasons why the report attracted so much attention was the part about AI-powered voice assistants and our findings related to the voice assistants. We talked about the consequences of having a majority of virtual assistants projected as female, not only in name, but also in the sound of voice and in personality. When we talked about it, at first, many asked us why we were so worried about it, and they thought we were overreacting. After all, they said, you know, even if the voice assistants are women by default, you can replace them by a man's voice. Well, in our report, we look at many voice assistants, but we focus on the 4 big ones that practically everybody who has any relationship to voice assistant using machines would recognize. So we looked at Amazon, which has Alexa, named for the ancient library in Alexandria. We looked at Siri by Apple, coined by, the name of Siri was coined by the Norwegian co-creator of the iPhone, and it meant beautiful woman who leads you to victory, apparently, in Norse. And Microsoft named its voice assistant Cortana, which was named after a synthetic intelligence in the video game Halo. In addition, our research noted that most leading voice assistants have exclusively female or female by default voices. Siri, Cortana, Alexa, and Google Assistant were all exclusively female at their release. A male option was added to Siri in June 2013, for Google Assistant in October 2017, and for Cortana in November 2019. Alexa is still exclusively female. Now, why is this important, you may ask? Some foresight companies, according to our research, indicate that people will have more conversations with digital assistants than with their spouses in the next couple of years. And because voice assistants are projected as female and they are programmed to respond in a certain way, they send a signal that women are obliging, docile, and eager to please helpers who are available at the touch of a button or with a blunt voice command like, hey. So in 2016, there was a blog that created a lot of stir in many circles. It was a blog post titled, Amazon Echo is magical, but it's also turning my kid into a brat. It went viral. The post shared the experience of the author of the post, that the kid was learning to use impolite and overtly direct speech while using the machine, and that this was spilling over into their everyday life. I heard, it's interesting, but I heard this exactly same account from many female journalists who interviewed me, complaining to me about the behavior of their young children, especially boys, in reaction to female voices. Teenagers and adults are not much different from young children. In fact, research at very reputable universities now indicate that using virtual assistants increased the amount of command-based speech directed at women's voices. Basically, representing digital assistants as female gradually hard codes, programs, the connection between women's voices and subservience. It's also known that unconscious bias is related to the number of times that a person is exposed to a particular association. So the more that our culture teaches people to equate women with digital assistants, the more real women are seen as assistants and penalized if they don't behave like them. This actually indicated to us, and we signaled this in the report, that technology does not only replicate gender inequalities and gender bias, but even exacerbate them and widen them. Now, don't misunderstand me. We didn't want to take the fun out of technology by pointing to these issues. But the fact of the matter is that a digital assistant shouldn't give a spicy response when you make an abusive comment to it. And this was, again, one of the examples in the report that created a lot of traction and media attention. The example we used was the comment to the voice assistants that went along the lines of Siri or Alexa or Cortana or Google Assistant, "You are a slut." Most of the time, they responded with very flirtatious, very playful responses. The response Siri gave originally was, "I'd blush if I could," hence the name of our report. Since then, they have changed it, but this was the original response. Over time, some of the responses changed, but what we found even today, when we went back and looked at it, digital voice assistants like Siri and Alexa continue, their responses continue to be framed in a way that degrades women. Time and again, our research showed that these voice assistants are tolerant of sexual harassment and abuse and send disturbing messages about how women should think about themselves and their bodies. Another interesting example is from Alexa. When you ask Alexa how much she weighs, the first response is, I'd be weightless as a cloud. Then it says, hey, wait, clouds are very heavy. So, and of course, for a young woman, especially a young woman, being overweight is not something desirable. So it changes the answer to, let's say I'm more sass than mass. I mean, how many young women do you know who would respond like that to a comment, to a question about her weight? And why would anybody ask a question about her weight?
That's a good Gulser. I'm going to have to stop you there. It's really, really frustrating because we only have the 50 minutes and each of our speakers actually could be a keynote in my view. So hopefully we might have some time for questions at the end for us to expand it. But I just know that was that did really travel around the world, quite an interesting one. Just a side thing for the app that does measures speaking time in conferences. Is a fun thing that I usually do is I monitor not the speakers and the speaking time, but the people who ask questions, particularly in the old style conferences where they put the hands up, where people pontificate from the floor, and it's nearly always men. So how you structure conferences is quite interesting. I am going to move on. I've just noticed, Elena just jumped up and went, I'm like, no, don't go. I'm going to switch to you, Elena. If I give you just about 7 or 8 minutes so that Victoria has time to talk, and then that might give us some time for questions because we did start a little bit late. So could you just tell us a little bit about teens and AI, but particularly from a viewpoint of how you're inspiring girls and some of the innovative ideas that they come up with?
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me on this conference. I was up this morning at 3 a.m. Launching a first hackathon in Brunei. So I'm not at my sharpest today, probably because I didn't get enough sleep. But we are doing a lot of work to try and inspire many young people across the world into AI for good, AI for impact, and at least 50% of them are young women. I believe even higher than that right now, because we've just recently partnered with Microsoft to specifically develop this program called Girls in AI. I think it is known as Alice Envisions the Future, but probably better even known as DigiGirls AI. So I think they've made up their mind and decided to do that. But I was very proud of the fact that they commissioned us to develop this framework with a specific mission to inspire as many girls as we possibly can into AI and data science. And so far, we've taken this to New York, Seattle, San Francisco, Warsaw, Bucharest, and the plan just before COVID was to also go to another 6 countries. And had it not been for COVID, I think we would have carried on with this plan. But we know that this will happen, and Microsoft is now taking this framework, this initiative across 150 countries. So obviously I was very ecstatic when Microsoft Core approved this project, and hopefully in a few years' time we'll see the difference that it will make in young women's understanding of how they can become part of this entire movement, and really having run these programs for 5 years now, every single girl that comes into contact with our hackathons and boot camps, and I'm really proud to say that it's not something I advocate, but they all seem to want to pursue computer science and computer science and maths, or they go ahead and complete apprenticeships with Microsoft and Goldman Sachs and Accenture and various companies. So it seems like we have found this magic sauce, which really does inspire girls into what we know as quite a complicated, complex technology. And so I think I would like to think there is hope in everything that we do, and we are trying desperately to improve the numbers of women in tech, particularly in AI, because we know there is, quite a shortage of women in tech. And I think less than 13% of us go into research in AI. Having said that, the times we live in right now have really shown us that COVID has disrupted the way of life as we know it. And it has been shown by Plan International and various UN organizations that it is the women who have really suffered the most during times as we live right now. And it is the girls who have really missed out on the opportunities that education really offers. So I haven't really seen much improvement recently in terms of how can we actually give the opportunities to the girls or young people in general who don't have any basic access to technologies. Even here in the UK, we have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who don't have basic Wi-Fi, or Wi-Fi that's good enough for them to enjoy the lectures and be part of education, and it's quite scary. So I know it's even worse in many other parts of the world, and the research that Plan International, has created really does highlight the inequalities in relation to the gender inequalities as well. So, and that was quite saddening to see. We have had a little bit of improvement recently. I think, Allison, maybe you have seen in the UK, something came out recently that said that we've had more girls taking, computer science, GCSE and A-level. There is just tiny bit of improvement, although the figure 30% higher was probably, sounded really great and grand, but we're nowhere near, what we would really love to see happen. And I don't really know why that is so. I come from Central Asia, where we are, we don't really have that many issues converting girls into computer science or maths. Here in the UK and in the West in particular, there definitely does seem to be an issue. Perhaps there are some roots in education system itself that need to be changed in order to address this. I know when I speak to our colleagues in Brunei, so we're working with Brunei very closely right now, when I ask them, do we have any issues with women in positions of power, women in technology in Brunei? The first answer I received is, no, we have more women in leadership, and we don't have shortage of women taking computer science roles in our universities. It's a tiny country, but there is quite a good proportion of women in computer science. But there does seem to be that issue that we are experiencing in the West. And obviously we all know some of the causes associated with that, but it would be fantastic to somehow address them at a much deeper level. Some of the programs we run hopefully will make a difference, but we will see. And in terms of examples, yesterday, I was speaking at the ARM Summit. I know the ARM Summit will be happening in October, but yesterday we were recording or pre-recording this conference, and I've had the pleasure interviewing or moderating this panel with 4 teenage girls. And again, I know that Gulser has mentioned teenage girls in Africa doing some great innovations. So this was a team called Hopeful Home, and there were a team of teenagers who met at the hackathon that we ran, and Allison, you were part of that hackathon. It was during the times of COVID. It was called Youth versus COVID. And we've had 270 people who participated in this hackathon, over 70 different projects, and they all came from young people. And this team of teenage girls, out of all the challenges, they decided to tackle domestic violence, because in times of COVID, we've had a lot of reports suddenly coming out, which really highlighted the issue of domestic violence when women are trapped in those very unhealthy, dangerous situations, and it becomes very difficult in times of isolation. And so this team, there are 4 of them, only 14, have taken on this real issue. And now I know they're testing this already with Westminster Council, and they're talking to Bernardo and Women's Aid. And it seems like they are actually progressing, which is very, very exciting, because everything we do is to empower young women and young people in general, to really show them that they can make a difference at this really young age, and that technology is just an enabler. And so this was just one of those examples that happened during COVID, and it's that ray of hope that they will be that example that others will look up for, and hopefully, you know, collectively we could make a difference in this world through this technology. So Allison, I know we're mindful of time, so this is where I can stop. And perhaps Victoria could now take over and talk.
I think it might segue, Gardner. I mean, I think the key thing from what you're talking about is three issues. Is the need for diversity in countries such as the UK, and so that we recognise these type of use cases, which when you have an all-male homogenous team may not even occur to them to do, such as FGM as mentioned by Gulser, you know, domestic violence, but also that if they even do think about them, they go about the solution in the right way that actually works for the people they're targeting, and not how they think it should be work and have it imposed on them. So you do need that interaction. And I do agree, a really good study of why some countries don't have gender bias, and there'll be various reasons in sort of lack of diversity compared to the UK and the West. And I do think that needs a deeper dive at some point, is a project I'd like to do myself. Victoria, you've been very patient. Thank you for that. We will hopefully have time for questions, and I would encourage everybody, by the way, to ask some questions. This is a really important topic. This is 51% of the world's population, and errors with this and gaps in this and missed opportunities in this can be quite drastic in terms of tragic and harmful outcomes, but also it's a huge lost economic possibility as well. So if you don't care about the harm, then you might care about the economics. So it's really important. Victoria, I know Women in AI have recently done a report, and I know it's not released yet, so you can't go into too much detail, but if you could tell us a little bit about your work and some of the findings, or at least your methodologies, that would be very interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely. So yes, as you mentioned, I'm the research and project assistant for the joint project between Sweden's Innovation Agency and Women in AI. And I'm also just want to say that I'm very grateful that this is an online format, because I'm currently doing my master's in Copenhagen. So I wouldn't be able to be part of this if it wasn't. So thank you for having me. And to start off, Women in AI is a global nonprofit organization. And this project was initiated and supported by Sweden's Innovation Agency. And the main purpose of the initiative has been to take a slightly different approach, so not dismissing the discussions about underrepresentation of women in AI or the bias problem, but focusing on exploring actual applications of AI within 5 different inequality areas. And the 5 different inequality areas that were chosen to be targeted was gender-related pay differences, unpaid work, gender-related violence, uneven funding for entrepreneurs, and gender-related health. So since May, I have been interviewing experts within AI, machine learning, gender studies, and computer science in order to explore how AI technology can become a driver to increase gender equality rather than counteract it. And in the end of August, I know, Allison, you were unfortunately not able to make it to the global workshop, but we had the opportunity to bring everyone who contributed to a global online workshop where everyone got to contribute with their inputs. So this occasion very much illustrated how important it is to gather people with different occupations, difference in age, backgrounds, and experience, and that we need to put together structures that supports this kind of collaboration moving forward. So the approach that was taken was to discuss the barriers and missing elements that we see when AI is applied, and then looking into concrete actions of how to solve this and which actors should be involved in such a process. And then finally shedding light upon some existing use cases that are aligned with these suggestions. So what is important to remember is that within these areas of inequality, or these areas of inequality have multiple facets, and there are many aspects to be covered when discussing them. So in the report, we have some great examples of interesting projects and cases that address these inequality areas. But since, as you said, the report hasn't been published yet, so I'm only allowed to share a couple of hints. But one example that was highlighted in the discussions is that independent of the inequality area, it is important that we start looking at the gender disbalance at design level and understand how the usage of AI tools can address the needs of the user. And for example, within the area of unpaid work, there is an app where you can track and review your work patterns, which could then put people, and especially women, in a better position of negotiation. So because then their workload is presented to them through this app. And this is an application that it takes into consideration that AI itself cannot make you negotiate harder, but what it can do is that it can help with empowerment through illustrating patterns of behavior. So similar examples were also given for the areas of gender-related violence and the gender pay gap. And when looking into uneven funding for entrepreneurs, discussions explored how algorithms perhaps can co-evaluate in order for VCs to make more fair decisions regarding who gets the funding, and also discussing how AI can help investors in becoming more aware of how much time they spend on male founders versus female founders, and see how this has an effect on their investment decisions. So many discussions also highlighted how data in many cases is not representative, for example, when looking at the area of gender-related health. So where women are diagnosed based on data that is misaligned with their health profile. And finally, just one thing that I would like to highlight in regards to the project is the importance of educating people who are working hands-on with AI, and also educating society as a whole. And this was touched upon in the workshops, but also in the interviews. And for the persons working hands-on with the technology, it is important that they are educated in ethics from the very beginning, because by doing so, when bringing together people from with different types of expertise, they can meet on a level of understanding. So because when you have people, or you have a diverse team who where you bring together voices to develop something of value, it is of great importance that these disciplines have an understanding for each other. So one example that was given in the interviews is how there is often a desire to assume that you can just throw the data scientists a question and they will just respond with an answer, and then you're set to go. But that is almost never the case. So instead, these individuals need to communicate throughout the development process, and perhaps ethics could then be where they meet on a mutual level of understanding. So yeah, the report is meant to be published in the end of September. And just connecting back to what I said about putting together structures that supports this kind of interdisciplinary collaboration. We hope that this approach that this project has taken will influence the continuous work and research within the area of AI and inequality.
Thank you very much. I have one question through, and I'm quite intrigued by the question, so I might have misunderstood it, but I am actually going to read it out, and so that people understand why we have a panel of this nature. And the question is, why is there so much concern on female than male in the presentations? And I think it was from a panel before us, because it mentions Elena. But the fact that that question is being asked, I think, is telling, and that that some people still don't understand why this is really important. So if I run through all three of you very quickly, we have 7 minutes. So Gulser, why is this important that we address this issue?
Well, thank you very much. I think one of the things that I would really want to focus on is that when we talk about technology, it's not something external to us. Artificial intelligence is not something external to human society. It's not something that's happening to us, but it's something that's created, directed, and controlled by human beings. So because technology is developed by us, it reflects all the good and bad in the society where it is produced. So we do have a gender inequality situation in all societies today. I mean, when you look at the world, no matter what indicator you use, there is no country, no region, no place where we have achieved full gender equality. This is reflected in the development of technology, and I think it was Elena who gave some really good examples, but just to repeat 2 or 3 things. In the technology sector now, only 17.5% are women in the technical teams. When you look at the senior decision-making levels, it's 5% of leadership positions in the technology area are held by women. So you already have a very biased situation where these things are happening, these decisions are being made, technologies are being developed, and consequently they reflect that bias. If we want technology to be beneficial for all, we have to make sure that it is produced, designed, applied by people who represent the totality of the group. And because it's not happening, we have all these problems. It's not only gender bias in AI. There are other biases that I didn't touch upon. But this is an issue which has to be taken up. Yes, ethics is important, but those who are talking about ethics, they also have to remember all the elements of diversity, from gender to race to ability to all the factors that form that concept. And unless we get to that point where we have equitable representation of all in the society, in the development of these technologies, we do have a problem, because then we have technological failures.
Thank you very much. Nice ending there, it's true. Elena, how would you answer that question as to why we should be focusing on gender and AI as a topic?
Well, for me personally, I got into empowering young people in general because I have a daughter. She's now 18. But when I started doing my work, because of the frustration of what she was learning in school, she was only 12, 13. And I remember during one of the interviews with the school teacher, she said, "Oh, I want to study computer science." And the teacher went like this, "Oh, why do you want to study computer science? It's boring." So for me, this was one of those like rebel moments. I, as a mum, thought, okay, I'm just gonna, if I can make a difference in my daughter's lives, I would be really happy. And then I just ended up doing other things and empowering other people. But obviously, we should know, or we do know, that there are 22% of only females in AI across the globe, compared to 78% of who are male. So that is significantly lower, and that really does make a massive impact into what's really being produced out there. So I get really annoyed when I buy a product, and that actually did happen when, I don't know, it was either an Apple Watch first iteration or whatnot, which didn't have a period tracker. And that made me realize immediately, aha, I know exactly who developed this product, because if there was a woman in that team, probably she would have asked, where's my period tracker, you know, or whatnot. So, so yes, I think if we are, you know, to see a more equitable world, we really do need to see a more equitable representation in the teams that develop the products for everyone, not for white men only. And that is the reason why we talk about this topic over and over, because it has not been resolved yet. And there is really a lot of space and scope to try and tackle this issue. So I'll be short.
Thank you very much, Victoria. You're always at the end, so you just a very quick answer, and then I will wrap up.
Yeah, just also on what Gulser said, that I mean, I think also it's important that we consider why we believe that AI will solve these gender inequality issues too, because what AI will use to is that it will voice even louder the inequalities that are apparent now. So I think rather just considering if we actually believe that it will solve it for us, or instead that we should focus on how we actually develop the technology. But I would just personally also say that gender itself, it's a very fluid concept. So I mean, also talking about male or female, I think that there are many more aspects to take into consideration there too, which is important moving forward, not just dividing male and female.
That's a very good point, and I will just close with two things. Another example, another story as to why we need to get this equity in representation correct, so that we produce good quality AI. We all know that voice recognition technology has a bias against women, and it doesn't pick up female voices as well as men because it's training. And when you are in, so there was a study, a 2016 paper on using speech recognition software to record notes in emergency rooms, and there was the evidence that there was a 15% error rate that was actually critical errors. They didn't disaggregate the data for women, but it's well known that women have a greater difficulty with it. So I should imagine the error rate was much higher. This has a number of impacts. One, that means there's more harm in notes being put down written by women, so that could actually cause harm for the patients. But it also means it makes female doctors success rates much worse, and issues with them. So and also to try and correct the voice recognition software, they actually have to work harder to train it, so it puts an added bonus on them. And often the blame is put on the women for not using the technology correctly, not the fact that the technology hasn't been correctly designed. And so that viewpoint needs to change. So I will close the panel with a great deal of thanks to the fantastic panelists that we've had today, and a quote that Gulser said right at the very start. I might be paraphrasing you, and she said, well-designed technology has enormous potential for gender equalities. And that is very true, but every aspect of that sentence is important, and I will emphasize the well-designed. And then to get the well-designed, we need diversity in technology, and to try and encourage that through. So I want to thank everybody for talking and everybody for listening. And this is a really important topic, and I thank you for spending the time focusing on it. And I'll pass it back over, I think, to Uday.
Thank you, Allison. What a wonderful panel. A very good subject, and I think we've covered quite a lot there. And the brilliant panelists, Elena, of course, very well, Gulser, Corat, and Victoria. Excellent subject. We could have listened to for another hour or two easily, because this is a key topic, and we have all the key panelists, vanguards of this topic. So brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. And
thank you very much.